There is a so-called authentic hadith that says if you eat 7 Ajwa dates every morning, no magic and no poison can harm you that day. A narration attributed directly to the Prophet, recorded in both Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the 2 most trusted hadith collections in Sunni Islam, the gold standard. 7 Ajwa dates and you are untouchable, protected. That day belongs to you. But then the same Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim also tells us that a Jewish man successfully bewitched the Prophet. The narrations describe the Prophet hallucinating, imagining he had done things he hadn't done, in such a state that the Archangel Jibreel had to come down and reveal where the curse was hidden so it could be broken. They also tell us that a Jewish woman poisoned him at Khaybar, and that the narrations explicitly say that poison never stopped working in his body, that it contributed to his death years later. 7 Ajwa dates, bewitched, poisoned. Think about that for a moment. Now when you raise this, when you point this out calmly and clearly, you don't get an answer. Nobody sits down and explains it. What you get instead is a dismissive, condescending, how dare you tone, and are told that hadith is not for the layman, it's only for the scholars. One has to read the commentaries written by ancient shuyukh and ulama. You are told the problem is you don't have the required prerequisite knowledge to understand the hadith. You are told reading is always the answer and the question is always the problem. Fine, let's read the commentary. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani spent decades of his life writing Fath al-Bari, his commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. The man started it in 1414 and finished it in 1449, 35 years. The completed work runs to 16 volumes. 16 dense classical Arabic volumes explaining one hadith collection. Then there is Al-Minhaj by Imam al-Nawawi, his commentary on Sahih Muslim, another enormous multi-volume work that scholars are expected to have studied seriously before they can claim to speak on hadith with any authority. These are not suggestions. These are presented as prerequisites. You have not earned the right to have an opinion until you have studied these works under a qualified teacher in an institution for years. And we are still not even close to the Quran. We are reading one scholar's explanation of another man's collection of narrations about what someone reported that the Prophet once said. That is the layer we are currently on. And then it gets worse. Because those commentaries, Fath al-Bari and al-Minhaj, were not considered self-explanatory enough. So scholars came along and wrote Hawashi, super-commentaries, commentaries on the commentaries. Al-Abi, the 14th century scholar, looked at al-Nawawi's commentary on Sahih Muslim and wrote Ikmal al-Muallim, a commentary on Sahih Muslim. Then as-Sanusi came along and wrote a commentary on top of that. A commentary on the commentary of a commentary. 3 layers deep, and we have not even left the hadith section yet. If your head is spinning right now, good. That is not an accident. It was designed exactly that way. Ibn Hajar's Fath al-Bari itself attracted Hawashi from later scholars who decided 16 volumes of explanation across 35 years of a man's life still wasn't enough explaining. These books exist. They are real. They are studied in traditional institutions today, and the men who mastered them are celebrated as the inheritors of prophetic knowledge. We are now reading an explanation of a collection of narrations about what someone said the Prophet said, and we are told this is the path to understanding Islam. Think about what this means for a normal person, a person who works, who has a family, who has a life. To go through these layers with any seriousness, you are looking at not years, but decades. Some people walk this road their entire lives and die, still being told they haven't read enough. Still being told there is another text, another scholar, another layer they haven't reached yet. The gatekeeping never ends because it was never designed to end. A gate that never opens is not a gate, it's a wall. But before we go any further, there is a question that never gets asked enough. Who built this gate and why? Because systems this elaborate, this layered, this convenient for the people running them do not build themselves by accident. To find out, as always, we have to follow the money. The scholars who produced these mountains of commentary were not poor men laboring purely for the love of deen and knowledge. The great Madrasa system that produced them was built and funded by sultans, caliphs, and the ruling class. Nizamiyya, the famous network of madrasas established by the Seljuk vizier Nizam al-Malik in the 11th century, paid scholars handsomely to teach, write, and produce. These institutions were not just schools, they were ideological factories designed to standardize state-approved orthodoxy. Al-Ghazali, one of the most celebrated names in Islamic intellectual history, held his prestigious position at the Baghdad Nizamiyya under direct state patronage. Fakhruddin Arazi moved from the Al-Ghawriya court to the Al-Khwarizmiyya court, literally trading his intellectual output for royal protection and gold. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the man who spent 35 years writing Fath al-Bari, served as Qadi al-Qadha, chief judge of Egypt under the Mamluk Sultanate. Al-Suyuti, who reportedly authored over 600 works, lived off gifts, endowments, and the generosity of the powerful. And to keep riding the gravy train and to show their benefactors they were getting their money's worth, they kept writing. Volume after volume after volume. Not because Islam required it, because writing was the job, and the job paid well. And when you are being paid to produce volume after volume with no deadline and no limit, you inevitably exhaust the important questions. So you start answering questions nobody asked. And when you look at what some of these volumes actually contain, it becomes almost comical. Scholars produced full treatises, dedicated booklets, on questions so obscure and so removed from any human reality that they border on self-parody. There is a Risala dedicated entirely to the correct Islamic ruling on eating the blizzards. There are multi-page scholarly works on the permissibility of chess. There are treatises on the precise Islamic etiquette of sneezing. Over 10 books dedicated solely to the topic of sexual intercourse. Is this what classical Islamic scholarship is about? So keep that in mind as we continue. Because every layer we're about to walk through, every gate still left to unlock, was constructed and maintained by men who had a direct financial and social interest in making sure you could never unlock it without them. With that established, let's get back to where we are. Because after all the Hadith collections, the commentaries and the Hawashi and the Hawashi of the Hawashi, surely now you have finally arrived. Except you haven't. Because now you are told you cannot read the Quran on your own, and you should especially never read a translation. You need to read and study it under a scholar, because if you don't, you will go astray. Reading the Quran will misguide you. Let that sink in. Reading the Book of Allah directly will apparently misguide you. But let's say you unlock that gate too. You have now read the Quran under a teacher. Now surely you understand what Allah's message to mankind actually is. Wrong again. Because now you need the Tafsir. Now you need Al-Tabari, whose Tafsir runs to 26 volumes in modern print. Now you need Ibn Kathir. Now you need classical Quranic interpretation layered on top of everything you have already waded through. And only then are you considered qualified to understand what God actually said. But here is the part that should make every honest person stop cold. You were always told that Hadith explains the Quran, so obviously these tafasir use Hadith to explain the Quran. Wrong again. The overwhelming bulk of what fills those tafasir is not Hadith. What fills them are two things, Athar and Isra'iliyat. Athar are statements from the companions of the Prophet, not the Prophet, the companions. Men who came after him, men with their own opinions, their own rivalries, their own blind spots, their own political contexts, the men who went to war with each other over power, who shed enormous amounts of Muslim blood, elevated inside these tafasir to a level of authority almost indistinguishable from revelation itself. Up to 70% of the tafasir are based on these. And Isra'iliyat. This deserves to be said plainly. Isra'iliyat are narratives and traditions borrowed directly from Jewish and Christian sources. From the Torah, from the Talmud, from rabbinical commentary, from biblical apocrypha. Absorbed into Islamic tafsir literature in the early centuries and used to fill out and interpret the words of the Quran. The Book of Allah being explained using the books of other people. Books the Quran itself says were altered. Books the Quran itself treats with deep caution. And yet there they are, woven into the explanation of nearly every major Quranic narrative you can think of. And this is exactly why things never once mentioned in the Quran, like the Dajjal, the Antichrist, the physical return of Isa, became settled Muslim belief, accepted as if the Quran itself stated them clearly. It didn't. Not one of them. This is the system. Hadith, commentary, Hawashi on the commentary, Tafsir packed with companion opinions and borrowed foreign stories. So many locked gates between you and the revelation of Allah. A structure so vast, so deliberately layered, so impossible to fully navigate in a single lifetime, that it functions not as a path to understanding, but as a permanent justification for why you are not yet qualified to understand the book Allah Himself calls clear, detailed, and easy to understand. The Quran says we have certainly made the Quran easy to understand, easy to remember. It repeats this 4 times in Surah Al-Qamar. 4 times. Not because Allah was being poetic, because Allah knew. He knew people would come along and build a maze around His words and charge admission to navigate it, and He wanted it on record, undeniable, that His book was never meant to be buried under a lifetime of gatekeeping. They built the maze anyway, and then they called it scholarship. They built an entire parallel religion between you and that book, a book that was sent down for you. This channel exists for one reason: to take what they spent centuries making complicated and putting it back in your hands. Hit like, consider subscribing to the channel if you found this video useful, and share it with someone who has been told they are not qualified to read their own religion.